More souls go to hell because of sins of the flesh than any other reason. Our Lady of Fatima. I do not hesitate to assert that everyone who has been damned was damned on the account of this one vice of sexual impurity, or at least not without it. Saint Alphonsus. Have you ever wondered why pornography is free? We pay for everything in life: food, shelter, entertainment. Even dying costs money. Often it's the things we do for pleasure for which we are willing to pay the most for. Think how much you have spent on vacations. Think of the thousands you have spent on home theater systems. Sports equipment does not come cheap, and men will spend more than $70,000 on a pickup truck. All these things in life that we consume have a cost. All things except for these evil images. Sure, there is content that men pay for, DVDs, members-only websites, but the majority is free. There are estimates that you can find online which suggest more than 90% of porn usage is from free content. Yes, the websites do make money from ads, yet it is still mind-boggling from a natural perspective as to why almost all evil images are accessible for free. Imagine if a bar gave away free drinks as a way of getting people into the club, with advertisements covering the walls. People pay for all of their vices, and in many cases are willing to go into debt or even commit crime in order to pay. Gamblers spend inherited fortunes. Drug addicts shoplift and mug for petty cash. But somehow, the most widely distributed drug on earth, porn, is free. Evil images are free because the devil does not want your money. He wants your soul. Porn is a get-out-of-heaven free card. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. It is a high-speed rail system on the rails to perdition. Families are destroyed. Souls are lost. Innocence is taken. Minds are perverted. And demons continue to feast. These videos are the devil's magnum opus. He has never had a more powerful weapon. With the click of a mouse, the swipe of a thumb, you give legions of devils entrance into your soul at home. A home where the Father watches evil images is not a home. It is a prison. When a man watches and brings porn into his home, he brings the wrath of God and becomes a plaything to Satan. If you watch porn and die without confession, you will go to hell. I understand that some will say I am being uncharitable by emphasizing so strongly on the hellish things. Please hate the messenger all you want, as long as you violently remove the internal intruder out of your home. There is nothing charitable about hell, and there is nothing more serious for men today than the plague of evil images. That's a couple of pages out of Kennedy Hall's book, Terror of Demons, Reclaiming Traditional Catholic Masculinity. And he uses the word evil images a lot because he doesn't want to glorify porn. And he even uses, when he types porn, it's just P dash 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 ending with an N. He just doesn't want to glorify the term. You know, my wife and I, Brianna, we were talking last night about a figure who may or may not have taken his own life. I think you know who I'm talking about. His partner was given a very light sentence. Most people are like, we could care less about the sentence. We want to, we want the list of people who are involved. And I was telling her, I said, you know what? You know, obviously that list is not going to come out because of all the powerful people that are on that list. And I'm willing to bet everything that there are also many world leaders, priests, bishops, and popes included, that are on that list. And I say this as a Catholic. I am well aware of the evil that is currently going on in the church. But that does not shake my faith in the church that Christ came to create in 33 AD. And I was telling her, I said, you know what? I said, I can only imagine the wrath that's coming for these men. I can only imagine the wrath that are coming for the men that have hurt God's children. The most prized possession, the most prized creation to God are children. Think about you as a father, as a husband. What would you do if someone hurt your child? Now magnify that infinitely to God's anger. And it reminds me of what Jesus says in Matthew 6. He says, but he that shall scandalize one of these little ones that believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone should be hung around his neck and that he should be drowned in the depths of the sea. Several times Christ says throughout the gospel, woe to you who gets one of these little ones to sin. Man, I can't even imagine the wrath that's coming, and it is coming. When? None of our business to know. But porn is definitely there, causing one of these little ones to sin. And so it's just something that I wanted to share with you. I'm going to go. There's a couple of pages here I want to continue on the topic of porn and the cost of a man's soul. But it reminded me of today's wisdom for the day. The wisdom for the day is Proverbs 6:25 through 29. It says, "Lust not in your heart after her beauty." So context here. Chapter 5, chapter 6, I think chapter 4, 5, and 6 are under the context of adultery. Okay, and so it's basically like, hey, you need to guard your mind, right? I've talked about this in a previous episode of the biggest vice that you and I, men as a whole, struggle with is impurity. Lusting with our eyes, physical acts of impurity, masturbation, you name it. Biggest problem for all men today. And so here in chapter 6, he's saying, lust not in your heart after her beauty. Let her not captivate you with her glance. For the price of a loose woman may be scarcely a loaf of bread. But if she is married, she is a trap for your precious life. Can a man take fire to his bosom and his garments not be burned? Or can a man walk on live coals and his feet not be scorched? So with him goes into his neighbor's wife. None who touches her shall go unpunished. And so there's several translations here. It says, so him who goes into his neighbor's wife, basically saying him that has sex with his neighbor's wife. The last several chapters of it have been around adultery, right? And again, I mentioned it targets what men currently struggle with the most: passions of the flesh, lust, impurity, right? The greatest struggle of every man are those two things. And what we know from Scripture is that the impure will not see God, right? Matthew chapter 5. And I like what it ties into what Kennedy Hall talked about. He says, the price of a loose woman maybe scarcely a loaf of bread. Basically, like, what this wisdom is telling us here is our sins and our passions of the flesh will pretty much cost us nothing. A cost of a loaf of bread, right? What Kennedy Hall talks about. 90% of porn is free. But yet, all other passions, all other pleasures in life we pay for, right? Travel, vacation, cars, things like that. We drop tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars on these things. The one thing that is free, the price of that one thing is a man's soul. Just take a look around you, as Kennedy Hall mentioned. Most desires of the flesh, lust and impurity, are free. Porn online is free compared to drugs, gambling, etc. Right? Men are willing to drop tens of thousands of dollars on that. And it's porn and other forms of impurity which are among the sins which cry out to heaven for vengeance. There are 4 particular sins that cry out to heaven. Number 1 is the blood of Abel, right? Homicide, infanticide, fratricide, patricide, matricide, and of course, abortion. Voluntary or willful manslaughter. The innocent blood of Abel cried from the earth to God, right? It's in their scripture, word by word. The second sin that cries out to heaven is the sin of the sodomites, right? Non-procreative sexual acts, which is sodomy. Man with man, woman with woman, right? Goes against nature. And how the cry of this most abominable sin came to God from the earth, just like Abel's blood crying to heaven. And how God poured down fire and brimstone to destroy the wicked sodomites, right? Sodom and Gomorrah. The third sin that cries out from heaven is the cry of the people oppressed in Egypt. The cry of the foreigner, the widow, and the orphan, right? The oppression of the poor, essentially. The oppression of the poor is a sin that cries out to heaven. Fatherless children, widows, and how God punished Pharaoh and the Egyptians for oppressing the Israelites. And number 4 is the injustice of the wage earner, taking advantage of and defrauding workers, basically, right? The 4th sin that cried to God for vengeance is to keep back the wages of hired servant or workman who's done the work, who's done the service, right? So those are the 4 sins that cry out to heaven. And I want to close here with the last things that Kennedy Hall talked about. So now he's basically telling his story of when he first encountered porn, right? And I think men, all of us, we know that exact story. We know exactly the time and place of when we were first exposed to that, right? So he continues here. I was not quite 10 years old when I was first exposed to evil images. I remember the day well. It was a Sunday. I know this because as a young boy, my family rarely attended Mass. My whole life, I dreaded Sundays, and until I embraced the faith, I could never understand why. Sunday felt like such an empty day in my soul. Friday was fun, Saturday was great, but Sunday was torturous to my interior life. I now know that my heart longed for God, and the feeling I recall can best be understood as a type of homesickness. I knew this world was not my home, and I wanted to be in my Father's house. It was 1998, and I am sure of this because I remember staring at a poster on my wall, trying to rid my mind of what I had seen. On the poster were 4 hockey players who played for Team Canada in the Nagano Winter Olympics that year. I stared at NHL hockey players in an attempt to clear my mind and finish the book report due the next day. Earlier that day, I went to the local college computer lab with a friend from the neighborhood and another man in his early 20s. The man in his 20s was one of our neighbors and was a military veteran. He was a generally stand-up man, and there was no reason not to trust him. My friend was a year older than I and came from a more worldly family. He was the sort of kid who would tell stories of all his escapades to the neighborhood kids. I do not know what happened to him, but I remember years ago hearing he had embraced a less than moral life. I wonder where he's at today, and I hope he's happy. These were the early days of the internet, and it was not uncommon to visit school computer labs to surf the web. Truthfully, there was not much to do for a young kid online then, and most computer activities were still confined to CD-ROM. The older friend who took us to the library had recently received a floppy disk full of pornographic images. I had no idea of this, but apparently the plan was to go to the library and use the computer to check out the pictures. In a way, this was similar to the unfortunate tradition of older brothers and even dads showing their sons their quote-unquote stash of dirty magazines. I was almost 10, and my friend was almost 11. Sadly, kids are exposed to evil images much earlier today in many cases. I was a young man who hit puberty earlier than most, so in theory, I was intrigued by the idea of the images. Of course, I thought women were attractive and thought it would be fun to see a little more quote-unquote risque. I can tell you that the experience was not what I had expected. Instead of a feeling of carefree excitement, I felt a pang of deep guilt in my stomach. After we returned home in that mid-afternoon, I focused on completing my book report due the next morning. The book I chose was Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. For years to come, the ghost of that fateful day came back to visit me. My virginal mind was gone, and my innocence was destroyed, naturally speaking. I can recall a Cheerios commercial that I watched later that year. In the commercial, there was an older brother and a younger brother sitting and eating cereal together. The older brother was around my age, and the younger brother was around 6 to 7 years old. I saw myself in each of these two boys. I looked with sadness at the older brother. As I expected, he must have been tormented in the same way. And I looked with nostalgia at the younger boy, as I wished to be young and innocent like him again. Not until many years later did I realize the power of confession as the only way to set the interior captive free. Most men reading this book will relate in some fashion, and I'm sure that my story is less tragic than some. But the problem is that my story is common. I see the faces of young men that I encounter when I speak about evil images. A whole room of 14-year-old boys could be getting out of hand, but when I speak to them about the danger of evil images, it is as if they've been visited by a ghost. They know it is eating away at their soul, and they are ashamed. As I gazed at my children, when they are asleep in their beds, I shudder at the thought of their innocent souls being infiltrated by evil images. I would literally shed my blood to avoid such a horror. Every child with an internet device in their hand has access to the largest library of hardcore evil images in history. We read about the decadence and revelry of the ancient Roman Empire. We hear of prostitutes and drunkenness as a commonplace. Believe me, the access your son has on this device in his pocket would make Roman revelry look like Sunday school. Evil images are the playground of the damned. The famous song Hotel California is said to be about the Satanist movement that gained momentum in the 1960s. It is hard to find mainline information about this, as popular culture cannot tell the devil from the daylight. But you only need to read the next few lines from the song to feel the icy chills of the devil's breath. And she said, "We are all just prisoners here of our own device." And in the master's chambers, they gathered for the feast. They stab it with their steely knives, but they cannot kill the beast. Last thing I remember, I was running for the door. I had to find the passage back to the place I was before. Relax, said the night man. We are programmed to receive. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave. Using evil images turns a man into a prisoner of his own device. At the altar of perversion, he gathers together with millions of people online to the chamber of demons for a feast of self-worship. Relentlessly, he tries to kill the dragon, but he just cannot kill the beast. He may try and go back to where he was before, but Hotel Hell is for reception only. Checking out of this infernal dwelling is humanly impossible, but nothing is impossible with God. If you struggle with evil images, then you need to reread chapter 3 and crucify your flesh. An addiction to these evil images is more serious than any physical disease. Dying by way of a slow flesh-eating disease would be better plight than dying a porn addict. I cannot stress this enough. If you die with one unconfessed mortal sin, you will spend eternity in hell. The following passage is taken from Sister Josephus Menendez's writings. So I'll close with Sister Josefa Menendez. She actually, I believe, was taken to hell and came back. She was, I believe she was a mystic. So I'll close with that. Then I was dragged along a very dark and lengthy passage, and on all sides resounded terrible cries. On opposite sides of the walls of this narrow corridor were niches, out of which poured smoke, though with very little flame, and which emitted an intolerable stench. From these recesses came blaspheming voices, uttering impure words. Some crushed their bodies, others their parents. Others again reproached themselves with having refused grace and not avoided what they knew to be sinful. It was a medley of confused screams of rage and despair. I was dragged through that kind of corridor which seemed endless. Then I received a violent punch which doubled me in two and forced me into one of the niches. I felt as if I were being pressed between two burning planks and pierced through and through with scorching needle points. Opposite and beside me, souls were blaspheming and cursing me. What caused me most suffering, and with which no torture can be compared, was the anguish of my soul to find myself separated from God. It seemed to me that I spent long years in that hell. Yet it only lasted 6 or 7 hours. Suddenly, I was violently pulled out from the niche, and I found myself in a dark place. After striking me, the devil disappeared and let me free. How can I describe my feelings on realizing that I was still alive and could still love God? I do not know what I am not ready to endure to avoid hell, in spite of my fear of pain. I see clearly that all the sufferings of earth are nothing in comparison with the horror of no longer being able to love. For in that place, all breathes hatred and thirst to damned other souls. Other mystics and saints tell us that the unconfessed sins with which we die will determine the type of punishments we receive if we go to hell. For example, a life of sterilized sexual activity would be punished by life in a sweltering desert with no possibility of quenching thirst. Just like a contraceptive lifestyle, there is no life in the desert. The garden of the marriage becomes dry and a wasteland with no hope of any fulfillment or procreation. Porn actresses have a high rate of suicide, and many actresses are underage. If the actress dies, the video is still available online. This means that millions of men have sinned against heaven by pleasuring themselves to videos of underage dead women. I shudder at the thought of what punishments would fit this crime. Demons do not think like us. They think only in hatred of God. The things they would love to do to us are unspeakable. Find a good confessor and frequent the sacrament of confession as is needed, making a true amendment of life. Receive the graces so that the temptations may go away. Depend on Our Lady, keep a rosary in hand, and beg for her intercession every single day. There you have it, dude. The cost of a man's soul. The things that will basically separate us from God will cost us almost nothing except for our soul. It's the biggest thing men struggle with today, sexual impurity. I struggled with it for years. I believe the last statistic I saw on this was like 70% of men are addicted to porn. If that's you, if you need help, if you need support, there are many resources out there for you. If you need to chat or whatever, reach out to me. Shoot me an email, Hector, strongashheck@strongashheck.com. That's it for today's episode, man. Appreciate you watching. See you on the next one. Peace.